Okay, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar. My name is Matt Maunder. I look after pre-sales over here at Automated Intelligence. And today's webinar is around how to achieve cost savings by flawlessly transitioning to the Microsoft Cloud. So, just before we get started, just want to go for a couple of housekeeping elements. So this is going to be approximately a 40-minute session today. So during that time, we're going to take you through some of the bits and pieces we'll go through in the agenda very shortly. This is an audio and visual webinar, one way only. So if you do have any questions, which I'm sure you have throughout the session, you'll notice that within the GoToMeeting, there is actually a Q&A pane. So if you do have any questions, please do use the pane to ask any questions you may have. What we'll do is over the course of the webinar, we'll keep an eye on the questions, but we'll envisage to answer them at the end of the session. Audio and visuals, as I say, is provided through GoToWebinar today. If you do have any issues, any technical difficulties, you're no longer able to hear or see for whatever reason, then you'll see my colleague Rachel is also on the webinar. She will be able to answer any questions, so please do use the chat and Q&A pane directed at Rachel, who will be able to help you and give you any assistance as required. So, just going through the agenda first of all. So, I'm joined today on this webinar by Simon Pearson, who is our Azure Partner Technology Strategist at Microsoft. And Simon's going to take you through a little bit of background around Azure and how you can leverage the power of Microsoft Azure. Following that, I'm going to take you through how we can actually make some of the concepts of Azure a reality by developing your Microsoft Cloud strategy, and how we can approach that using automated intelligence tools. At the end of the session, as I've already mentioned, both Simon and I will be very pleased to take any questions you may have around some of the content that you've seen in today's session. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Simon, who's going to take you through the first part of the webinar.
Morning, everybody. So thank you, Matt. My name's Simon Pearson. I work for Microsoft. I am an Azure Partner Technology Strategist, which effectively means that I look after pre-sales for partners at Microsoft, and it's my job to work with partners to help enable them and become Azure specialists and use Azure in their solutions. So a partner such as Automated Intelligence work very closely with us. And I'm very happy to come in and talk to you today about some basics around Azure at a business level. @Brittany Azure is my Twitter name, so again, if you want to keep up to date with the latest things coming out around Azure, follow me on Twitter, and I'll keep you up to date with all the latest features as they're announced. So, let's start off with Microsoft, and what you'll hear about Microsoft is MobileFirst CloudFirst as our strapline, our new strapline. And what do we mean by this? When we say mobile first, we don't mean the mobile devices, the Chromebooks, the iPads, the iPhones that we now support, as well as Microsoft products. What we mean by mobile first is we mean you guys. The ability to work from anywhere you want in the world, work from home, work from the office, work from a customer site. It's about having mobility and being able to work and be productive wherever you are. And the cloud first part supports that. To have a great kind of experience in a mobility world, you've got to have a great back-end infrastructure, and you need that infrastructure to be in something like the cloud to give you that kind of enterprise application layer in a mobile world. So that's what we talk about when we talk about mobile first, cloud first. And of course, the cloud element of that is called Microsoft Azure, or Azure if you come from the US. And in the last 12 months, we've had over 500 features added to the Azure platform, which is quite a lot. And it's, there's a lot of change going on. It's a very, very, very fluid product in terms of new products and new features coming onto the platform. But what does this kind of show? It shows that this is now becoming the backbone of everything Microsoft, and it shows that this is where all the Microsoft investment's happening. Loads and loads of features which we're reverse engineering and putting into our server products as well, so we're getting a great cloud and a great server cloud experience. And for Windows 10, for example, which is coming out in July, you'll see there's a lot of automated integration built into Windows 10 for Azure, like single sign-on, like the ability to back up and take snapshots of your desktop and put it into Azure. So these kind of things are what's coming out. But there's a lot of people, as you know, out there who do cloud. You've got the likes of Amazon Web Services, Google, Rackspace, IBM. What differentiates Microsoft and Microsoft Azure? And this Venn diagram kind of represents why we think Azure is unique in the marketplace and why it really focuses and hones on an enterprise and a business audience. The first of the kind of areas is hyperscale. Now, what do we mean by hyperscale? By hyperscale, we mean having a complete infrastructure that reaches globally, that has resilience and interconnectivity between all different areas of the world, giving a true enterprise class solution. And in the hyperscale space, there's probably only really 3 players that do true global scale, and that would be ourselves, it would be Amazon Web Services, and it would be Google Cloud. The other players like IBM, Rackspace have very good offerings, but don't really have that true global reach that we would consider as being truly enterprise class. The next area is hybrid cloud. Now, hybrid cloud is the ability for being able to integrate your on-premise data center, your on-premise infrastructure with the cloud. And again, if you look at Microsoft's legacy and where we've come from, we've got a lot of investment in servers and in your data centers currently. And what we've done is we've tried to, as I say, take as many of those 500 odd features that are coming out a year and add them into things like SharePoint Server, add them into things like SQL Server, the new Windows Server. And you'll see with the new Windows Server release coming out next year, and as I say, with Windows 10, there's a lot more integration going into our products, and you'll see that happening more and more. And what that means is that you as a customer can get to choose what you want to put in the cloud and what you want to keep on premises. For example, you might not want to put your key line of business that if it went down, would mean you'd lose your business. You probably don't want to put that into the cloud right now. Probably don't feel comfortable with it. You might not want to put sensitive customer information or credit card information into the cloud. So with hybrid cloud, you get to choose what stays in the cloud and what stays on premise, but you can seamlessly integrate that. So you, from a user point of view, it feels like you're on one network, it feels like you're on one system, but you're really leveraging the core advantages of moving to a cloud platform, which is things like low cost, being able to pay for it when you use it, things like scalability and be able to scale up when you need that compute power and scale down. So that's the kind of thing that hybrid enables. And the final one is enterprise grade. And by enterprise grade, I look at kind of 2 areas here. First of all, I look at the fact that we're looking for enterprises to move their core systems onto a cloud platform and feel comfortable with it. So we offer lots of things around resilience and something called geo-redundant storage, where you can have everything in one of our data centers replicated to another data center on the other side of Europe or around the world. But we also underwrite everything we do on Azure with SLAs, and these are monthly SLAs, not yearly ones, which makes a difference, because if you have a bad month, you pay out on the bad month. And they're all financially backed SLAs. And most of these SLAs start at about 99.9%, but they can go to higher uptime figures than that. And that gives you, as customers, peace of mind that if you put something onto the Azure platform, that it's safe, that it's going to be up, and it's going to be enterprise grade effectively. And the other part of enterprise grade that we do, which again I think differentiates us, is we have a lot of support available to partners and a lot of support available to customers to help you guys with implementation, to help you guys with say you were doing a proposal or something around Azure, or you had a project you wanted to implement around Azure. We have everything from our Premier support to give you technical support, to consultancy available, to free telephone support, things that we feel our competition don't offer. So it's a real kind of robust platform. And if you take those 3 areas together, that's really what makes Azure, in our eyes, unique. So we talked about hyperscale, and Microsoft has 19 data center regions worldwide, just to give you an idea, and it's investing $4.5 billion every year into its infrastructure platform, and that goes into new data centers, and it goes into refreshing those data centers to keep the latest hardware in there so you get the best experience. Now, we talked about 19 data centers being available. Within each of those 19 data centers, we have a number of buildings, and each of the buildings is about the size, roughly, of a football pitch or an IKEA. If you go shopping at the weekend, you know the size we're talking about. Basically large enough to hold 2 747 jumbo jets inside them. That's the kind of scale we're talking about. And within each of those regions, we have 16 of these buildings. So you think about, we've got 16 of these buildings over 19 data center regions, and that gives you the scale and the investment that Microsoft's making into Azure. And all those buildings are separated, and they're separated there because if you get a fire in one, you don't take out the other buildings. And although on the diagram it shows them next to each other, some of those buildings are up to 50 miles apart in the same region, so that again it gives us that further kind of security and enterprise availability. So just to give you an idea about the kind of computing power that's available to you guys today, that's 600,000 servers available for you to come and pay for now, please, in each region. Okay, so it's a huge amount of computing power, and where we differentiate is you only pay per minute for the compute that you use. So you can use a huge amount for a few minutes if you need to at the end of a month run or something, shut it down and pay very little money compared to an on-premise solution. So that kind of covers the Azure platform, but before I hand back to Matt, I just wanted to talk about some basic cloud computing concepts. You've probably all heard these terms, but we have infrastructure as a service, which is used really for existing applications. It's used for migrating your current data center infrastructure onto a cloud platform, but having the same control. We have platform as a service, and this is where Microsoft for Azure will look after more of the infrastructure for you, and you bring your applications on top of that and your data, and you consume it, and you normally install the platform from a preset image from Microsoft that Microsoft looks after. And finally, you have software as a service, and software as a service is something like an Office 365 or a SAP Online or a Salesforce.com application, where you basically rent the application out and you just bring yourself and the data to it. So to put it into something that you can understand more, if you look at this slide, if you look at everything in blue, that is traditionally what you would look after. And if you look at everything in green, in a cloud computing model, that's the layers that Microsoft as your provider will look after. So as you can see, infrastructure as a service, basically you still have to do all your patching, you have to do your server upgrades, your users, all that kind of thing. Microsoft just gives you that infrastructure, as it says on the tin. If you look at the other end of things like software as a service, for example, you can see that like Office 365, Microsoft looks after everything on that platform. You don't have to worry about updates, you don't have to worry about new versions coming out, you don't have to worry about patching. It's all done for you. All you do is you bring yourself and the data and you consume it. And if you look at where cloud's going over the next decade or so, I think the kind of consensus is that we'll move away from the left and move very much towards the right. So cloud in a decade's time will be very software as a service focused, if not entirely software as a service focused. So we talked about these software as a service apps, and there's now over 2,500 applications out of the box that you can access with Azure. So you can log on to an Azure cloud using a single sign-on and be able to access everything in the Azure cloud. But also, because we talked about this hybrid cloud model, you can also, from that one sign-on, access everything on premise as well in your own data center and in your own networks, should you want it to, with permissions. And also you can access these 2,500 applications through that same one sign-on. So you don't have to go and have a password for every single different software you're using, a password for your corporate network, a password for your cloud. You have one password, one sign-on, which you can authenticate, and it can be from any device. It can be a Windows, an Android device, it can be an Apple device. You can sign on from that one point and access everything. And the biggest problem we probably come across, or the biggest opposition to moving to cloud, is I'm not sure that cloud's secure because I can't see it. because I can't touch it, I don't know where my data is. I'm worried about it. So this slide is just to kind of say that Microsoft is probably the most secure public cloud offering on the market at the moment. But to be fair, most of the big cloud providers are very similar. We've put a huge amount of investment into getting ourselves accredited. We, as a platform, it was what was IL2. It's on G Cloud in the UK. We have partners who can offer a similar environment in IL3 for UK data sovereignty, should you need it as a government agency. So it's a very secure platform, and that 4.5 billion of investment we do year on year, a lot goes into security, and I would argue that as customers, you probably struggle to match the same kind of secure environment in your own data centers as we provide. So when you use the platform, our cloud platform, you'll be able to see there's three kind of families of servers you can use. You have the A series, which is the kind of server you'll find in your data center right now. We have something called the D series, which is a robust robust family of computers designed for line of business and heavy computing. And now we've announced the G series of computing, and this is really a supercomputer kind of model. It's very, very high power. It's not cheap, but again, because you pay for the minute, it's great if you need that kind of solution. And it's the largest virtual machine available in any public cloud from any offer by at least double at the moment. And on the back of that, we have something called premium storage. Now this is an SLA'd storage, and we guarantee the number of IOPS, inputs, outputs per second. And to give you an idea, this is more than 50,000 IOPS per virtual machine that you can attach to a D series machine or a G series machine, giving you a true enterprise platform. To give you an idea of 50,000 IOPS, your laptop you're probably looking at this webinar on now, or your computer, is probably less than 1,000 IOPS, to give you an idea of the speed of read you can do. So you're running a large CRM app, a large data processing app, this is the solution for you in the cloud. So finally, before I hand over to Matt, just to let you know, Azure it's got hundreds of features in it, as we talked about, and those are kind of built into a catalog of services. And when you come in and you use the Azure cloud, you will find that you don't just come in and use one thing. You'll find that it's kind of like a Chinese menu. What you've got to do is you've got to choose different elements of services from the Azure catalog and use those to build up your architected solution. So don't approach it thinking it's just a product you consume. What you have to do is look at the different areas, bring them together in a true cloud environment, connect them and get them talking to each other, and that will give you your solution you're looking for. So I hope that's been useful. I'm going to hand over to Matt now, who's going to talk about Automated Intelligence. Automated Intelligence are one of our large partners. We do loads with them, and Matt's going to talk about some of this bespoke stuff they do. This slide that's up here, just you're going to get a copy of the slide deck. It's a list of Azure resources for you to go and use. Azure is free for you to go and try for a month, so just go in there, you can consume it for 30 days for free. I encourage you to go and play with it, because there's nothing like playing with the product to get to know it. So thanks for your time.
Great, thank you very much, Simon. So what I'm going to take you through now is a little bit around how we can actually help from an automated intelligence perspective make some of the benefits and capabilities that Simon has discussed over the last 20 minutes reality. Before I do that, I just want to kind of take you through some of the typical challenges we see about building a modern information strategy and taking into account a cloud-based platform as part of that. The first one typically is the fact that there are naturally going to be embedded ways of working within your organizations. They're going to be legacy platforms, legacy methods, legacy ways of actually managing and consuming data, consuming content. file shares. That's the classic. Everyone has a file share platform of some description, but as we know, there are much better ways of actually controlling and managing information. But users typically like the way they know how to work, and moving them on to offer those platforms to more modern concepts can be a challenge. And then when you take it into cloud as a concept, again, Simon's already discussed that there are always still concerns about, should I move to the cloud? Is it the right thing to do? Is it going to be secure, and all those sorts of things that Simon's already discussed are, areas that we can have discussion points on. Now, one of those kind of typical concerns is about managing policy, managing rules and regulations. But unfortunately, with the legacy way of doing things, with those kind of traditional methods, it is very hard to actually control policy, rules, and governance. So if we can actually start building a platform which is designed from the ground up, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on premises, whether it's a hybrid environment, if we build that platform with those policies in place and is designed to manage your policies, your legal obligations, and so forth, that's going to significantly improve governance within the business, and that's something that Automated Intelligence do very well. But it's all well and good saying all of these things and saying how we can build a new strategy, but most importantly, if we don't take into account the user, then it's all for nothing, because if the user is not using the new platform, if the users aren't involved in that transition process, and ultimately if they don't have a fantastic experience, then unfortunately it's unlikely to succeed, because users simply won't use these new ways of working. So it's absolutely crucial that we take into account the user experience, giving users familiar ways of working and familiar ways of doing things. That then, as part of that, that will also then help us achieve the return on investment that these new platforms are designed to deliver. With a cloud-based strategy, that can be a reality. If you look at areas like Windows Azure, where the cost of storage, for example, which is an area I'm going to talk about, is very low, that can have significant benefits, and I'm going to be talking about that in a second. But ultimately, from the smallest council to the largest enterprises or largest central government organizations that we work with day in and day out, everyone is looking at the cloud in some way, shape, or form. They all have a cloud strategy or are moving to the cloud. In fact, around 70% of businesses worldwide either have a cloud strategy, are in the cloud, or are looking to move. So by and large, we see that people want to move to the cloud. A strategy is desired, but the organizations don't typically know the best way to get there and how to kind of kick things off. So that's another area I'm going to be discussing very shortly. So just to build up this slide, so as I mentioned, a lot of clients come to us and say, well, we want to look at cloud-based strategies, but where should we start? And there are a variety of ways in which you can look at how you adopt and how you consume cloud-based services. Now, you can look at, for example, building out, looking at your business critical systems, ERP, and so forth, and actually looking at how could you move those to the cloud. But that typically involves more complexity and more risk of moving those very crucial systems into a cloud-based platform. It certainly can be done. But if you're starting out with a cloud-based approach, perhaps you want to look at kind of a more low-risk strategy where you can get better savings early on, and then adopt more and more cloud services as that kind of matures within the business. So we typically take an approach where if you're looking for to achieve cost savings, achieve the benefits of a cloud, but want to achieve that low risk, perhaps you could look at things like your disaster recovery or archive of data, taking advantage of the very low price point of cloud-based storage as an example to store information that you need to keep, but doesn't necessarily need to be in your primary expensive storage. So that's where we can start looking at actually getting the benefits of a cloud-based strategy, but without having that huge risk associated with it as well. And I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to show you by way of a demonstration, how we can achieve that kind of approach. So if we consider, this is a common conversation that we have day in and out with our clients around the cost of storage and how we can actually start leveraging a business case by moving to the cloud. Now, when we speak to our clients, what we typically see is that they have significant amounts of data where data can cost of storage can be around about £20,000 per terabyte per year mark. Now that might seem a lot, but if you consider the management costs, the overhead, disaster recovery, replication, all those sorts of things, you might find that your cost of storage and your expensive, like I say, tier one SANs, etc., can actually reach that mark. In fact, we were speaking to a client the other day where it's around £28,000 a terabyte. So that cost of storage is huge. But on the flip side, what we typically see is that the kinds of data that's there is around 50-60% of that data is actually not used very often, is old or redundant data. So again, that you're spending a huge amounts of money storing data that is accessed very frequently. In fact, what we see typically is that the data recall rate is around 1 or 2 years. So what we can start looking at with automated intelligence is developing an intelligent archive point whereby data that isn't used so frequently can actually be moved to an archive type storage platform. And this is where I was saying earlier, we can start making some immediate cost savings very quickly by analyzing your data from file shares and legacy platforms and moving that data to cheaper storage. And Azure, with its cheaper blob storage, is a fantastic way of doing that, where the cost of storage is around about 30p per gigabyte, which is significantly cheaper than potentially what you're paying right now to store that data, which doesn't need to be on that expensive storage where it's not used as frequently. But how do we achieve that? How do we go about actually doing that? So if you take into account your legacy platforms and so forth, file shares, emails, legacy content, or records management platforms, naturally you're going to have a strategy of somewhere you want to be. And a lot of our clients are looking at platforms like SharePoint, whether that's on premises, in the cloud, or in Office 365, and are also looking at Windows Azure. So we have a target, we know where we want to be, but how do we achieve those cost savings? How do we make sure we get the right data into those right locations and develop a better storage strategy and information strategy as part of that approach? So utilizing our software solutions, that automated intelligence, we have a solution called DataPoint that allows us to effectively scan and analyze all of the different data sources you have within your environment. And like I say, whether that's anything simple as file shares or a complex legacy content management platform, we can look at that data and we can ingest that into our approach. And that allows us to do a few things. We can deduplicate. We can identify where the duplicate data is. And again, file shares, that's very, very prevalent typically. We can identify redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. And again, this is very much based upon the rules that you have. So how you consider what you'd consider rot, as we term it. So that might be based upon the file type, its age, its context, where it's located, or even keywords or other elements within the files themselves. We can identify that. We can then categorize information. So we can apply business context, which may not exist currently. We can say whether it's financial data, we can look for personally identifiable data and ensure that we identify that different types of information that we have based upon your rules. When we do that, we can then transform the data. We can re-architect it, add metadata, enrich metadata as part of that before we move the content into our new platform. So all of these things are designed to understand the information that we've got, identify what we have, what's useful, what's not, and how it needs to be treated, because then that allows us to get that data, that content into the most appropriate location. It could be SharePoint on premises, it could be Office 365, depending on if it's maybe secure, sensitive, it needs to be staying within the country or what have you. Or we can take data as an example which is no longer needed to be kept on our primary storage, and based upon how we've identified and categorized the information, we could potentially move that into Windows Azure, where the price cost is very low. But wherever we put it, we're going to ensure with AI solutions that we manage that data, we apply policy around it. This is a fully extensible platform, and this is merely an example. This is an approach which kind of encompasses all of our experience over the last several years, how we can look at and give you a kind of an art of the possible how we might achieve some of these things. But then once it's, for example, in Azure, or once the content is potentially in the cloud, we need to still make sure that the user has a fantastic experience and we don't have start having siloed or disconnected data sources, because we'll then have the same problem. We still want to bridge that gap so that information, content, is still accessible through a single point of contact, whether that's SharePoint or otherwise. So once we perform that migration, that cleansing and categorizing exercise, what we can then start looking at is utilizing cloud services from Automated Intelligence to actually bridge the gap between the two platforms. So where we have content in SharePoint, where we have content, for example, in Azure, we still want to be able to access and manage that content in the same way. So Azure delivers, as Simon's already talked about, huge amounts of elasticity. It gives you huge amounts of flexibility in how you can store content, whether it's archive content, whether you need a location to export content for Freedom of Information Act requests, legal discovery, that sort of thing. So we can build out that platform. But ultimately, what we want is a bi-directional relationship between our content management platform, like SharePoint, and the Azure containers and that store our legacy content, as an example. So cloud services enables that, and I'm going to show you that by way of a demonstration in a short while. What that basically means is that within cloud services, which can be hosted in your own data centers within Azure itself as a cloud-based service, we can ensure that information that's being stored in Azure in that low price point is still browsable through SharePoint libraries. We can ensure that SharePoint search works on that content as well. So ultimately, we have that single place, that single way of accessing our content, whether it's stored directly in SharePoint or in Azure, in one place, but achieving those massive cost savings for the data that we might have. So I think, I've talked a little bit about some slides and how that, potentially could work. Well, let me show you now by way of a demonstration, how we can make some of that a reality. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've got a SharePoint environment, as you can see over here, and what we've got is a file structure which is empty at the moment, which is where I want to store data that I'm going to migrate from this kind of flat file storage information here. So I'm going to kick off migration using data point, and this has kind of been pre-configured just for purposes of this short webinar, just to give you an example of how this might work. And what's going to happen is we're analyzing the data in my data source. That's now migrating my useful data into SharePoint, into my primary SharePoint storage. And we'll start seeing that kind of trickle into my SharePoint locations being categorized, as you can see accordingly here. And you can see as well, we're also applying metadata. We're moving that data into its most appropriate location automatically based upon business rules and logic that will be defined by yourselves. At the same time, we're also moving the redundant data that we don't necessarily want to store in SharePoint into our Azure container. And if I refresh that, you'll see a new container will automatically have been created called rot files, which has all my old data, and that's also been moved in, as you can see. So what we've done, first of all, is that kind of first step, that first pass, where we've moved useful data into SharePoint and data, the majority of data that I don't need anymore, into our cheap Azure storage, into blob storage. But what we want to do now is ensure that that content is still accessible through SharePoint. So what I'm also going to do, and I'm going to run this now just to kind of demonstrate the concept, but ultimately what we're doing here, what I'm showing you is a process which will happen in the background, which will automatically look at that Azure container, and it will start scanning and bringing that content and making it accessible through SharePoint without actually moving it into the SharePoint environment. So if I look at and this again will take a few seconds, but you'll see the content start trickling in as well. So the rot data that I've moved into my cheap Azure storage will stay where it is, but through our cloud services process, we are now able to actually access that SharePoint data, that Azure data via SharePoint. So if you consider for it as an example, archive data, rot file, as I've already mentioned, this is information which we don't need to keep in our primary storage. We don't want to clog up SharePoint. Or if you think about something like Office 365, you get a certain amount of data per user, and that data quota can be used up very quickly. So what we're demonstrating is the fact that whilst that content is still in Azure, we keep that in Azure and we're not clogging up SharePoint storage because it's data that isn't accessed very frequently, it's old, but we still need to keep it and manage. We can reference that into SharePoint by way of by utilizing our cloud services. So if I try and access one of these documents now, you'll see in the URL at the top here, that's actually coming from Azure, and that blob, that file, is stored in Azure. So we're leveraging that cheap cost of storage while still having a single interface to access the information that we have. What I can also do as well, if I refresh my screen, you'll see the rest of the content has come in. Effectively, these are shortcuts. What we can also do is we can leverage things like SharePoint search. So we can actually search on our content, and we can find archive data by using SharePoint search and the powerful SharePoint search engine that is available out of the box. So we can actually search specifically on archive data and find the information or find archive data associated with the kind of discovery we want to achieve. Export that if we need to, or treat it in any other way. So what I'm ultimately showing you here is the fact that whilst the content doesn't reside in SharePoint itself, it's still in our cheap storage, if you like, within Azure. What we're actually showing is the fact that it's built into the single interface. It's still leveraging existing SharePoint functionality, so we can treat it as if it does reside in SharePoint. So if I go to my Project Blue window up here now, so you'll see the content is now accessible, and I can open it up if I need to. As I say, you can see it's coming from the Azure storage, and I can view that in a read-only mode if I want to do so, as you can see here. which is great. So from a kind of a discovery perspective and from a viewing perspective, I can still have access to my data if I need to and treat it. But what happens, for example, if I actually want to then make some edits to that data? Actually, I want to make some changes that effectively unarchive that information. As part of the process, we can actually recall that file back into SharePoint, so we can actually start making changes. We can make edits. I can open up that document now and actually make changes to the file if I need to do so. And of course, this is all permissions driven. It's controlled through SharePoint so that only the right people can actually do what they need to do. So let's just make a quick change here. Emphasize that only, as Simon was saying earlier, and then I'm going to save that back into SharePoint. So once I've made my changes and I've done what I need to do, I can then push that back into Azure. So I can go into my workflows. And again, this is something that will happen in the background automatically, but just to kind of show you how that might work, I can kick the workflow off, and that will send that back off into Azure, and you can see that represented by the little shortcut here. So now again, that's now back into Azure where it's being stored in that cheap storage. So what I've demonstrated there is how we can migrate content into Azure. We can still reference it in SharePoint, make it accessible, bring it back into SharePoint for collaboration, but actually move it back out again. So if you think about some of the concepts and how things like workflows and so forth work, this is our workflow we built into SharePoint. What that basically then means is we can have policies within SharePoint as well. So over the course of time, as data gets old, as we get to those lower data recall and contribution rates, where actually after maybe 1 or 2 years, we know that if data isn't being used as frequently, we don't need to store it in SharePoint anymore. We can automatically have policies through the AI engine to send that back into Azure automatically after it's being used. So if I look at my policy dashboard here, that's another AI capability built into SharePoint. In this case, I can actually have, for project documents, for example, I can have trigger points that say after a certain period of time, maybe if a document hasn't been modified for 5 years in a certain retention region or a certain jurisdiction, that content automatically moves to Azure. So whilst I've been showing data kind of going back and forth by showing you various functions and moving things around myself, I've shown that by way of demonstration, but ultimately what we can do is have that happen automatically. And that's an incredibly powerful concept by ensuring that you effectively have a robust policy-driven strategy within your content to ensure that data doesn't become siloed, data doesn't become stagnant, but ultimately you are using and leveraging the most appropriate platform to store your data. And that's really the power of AI, working with cloud platforms like Azure, like Office 365. We can build that strategy and take that low-risk approach to the cloud. So, just jumping back to my slides here, I'm just going to finish up. So, in summary, Simon's already discussed the fact that Azure is a trusted and accredited platform. We have clients using Office 365, using Azure. Microsoft have the same across a whole range of different organizations and different sectors. I've done a lot of work with central government organizations who have a very robust cloud strategy. So the kind of conversations we're having now about is cloud right, the security element or the security concerns are going away. It's more about how do I develop a strategy and do the right thing for cloud. Cloud doesn't necessarily mean putting everything into the cloud immediately. It's about having a strategy that we can work with you on and establish what and where things should go and what are the most appropriate locations and what are the most appropriate platforms we should utilize. Everyone's going to be different. Everyone's going to have a different kind of view. So we want to make sure that is right for you. But ultimately what it means as well is that we can start taking account some of the cost savings and advantage of some of the cost savings that things like Windows Azure delivers. Why store information that's no longer used in a very expensive storage where it costs £20,000 a terabyte to store? Why not you start leveraging these cheaper cloud platforms for low risk content, move that into the cloud very quickly, and AI can help you do that with our migration methodology and solutions. Ultimately, then we can start mitigating risk. We can put the right data in the right places. Again, what AI do and what AI help a lot of clients with day to day is identifying the right data appropriate for the cloud. That doesn't necessarily mean every single gigabyte of data. You're going to have information with personally identifiable data. You're going to have information maybe classified as secret or what have you. And we may want to have a different approach for that type of data. But we can help you understand that and then ultimately leverage the power of the cloud for some of these other for the majority of the data that you have. So ultimately, It's about a tailored approach. It's leveraging the power of on-premises solutions, cloud solutions, and developing a strategy that is absolutely right for you and utilizing the appropriate combination of these platforms for your own strategy and your own requirements. And that's something we're very keen to help you and work with you on. So with that, we're right up to the 40 minutes, so we're right on time. So what we'd like to do now is, first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I hope you found some of the little snippets that we've been showing you useful. I'd like to look at some of the questions you've been posing throughout the session, and then we can look at identifying some of those areas there. So if we open up the floor, as I say, if you want to ask any questions that you may have, be very keen to ask those. So I'm going to hand over to Simon for the first question, which is the aforementioned 30 pence per gigabyte. Is that a daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly cost?
So it's a Gartner stat, and the stat I use is the Gartner say that to have a gigabyte of data on premise per month costs $1. Okay, this is the actual statistic we use. Where to put it into a cloud environment, it's not necessarily a Microsoft cloud environment. It's a public cloud environment. Costs just 3 cents. And that was based on blob storage. So it kind of gives you an idea of the cost savings you can make. You can go from $1 on premise to 3 cents off premise. Realistically, in the marketplace, although it's blob storage, I would say, because you get different types of storage, you get file storage, you get databases, the cost saving seems to be around the 60 to 70% cost saving against on-premise if you took an average. But that's where the stat comes from, and it was a monthly stat.
Great, thank you very much, Simon, for that. Another question that we've had is around the data centers that you were talking about, Simon. Is there a UK data center? Where are those data centers located in Europe?
Okay, so what we have is the 19 data center regions. Within those 19 data center regions are paired up. So we've got 2 within Europe. Those are North Europe, which is in Dublin, and we've got West Europe, which is in Amsterdam. There's other data centers planned to be built in Europe, but at the moment that's the secret sauce recipe of where the next data center is going to be. It's what gives us the competitive edge, so I can't say anything about those. What I will say is Microsoft Azure is unique in that it's secure and it guarantees that everything stays within the region that you put the data in. So if you put something into the European region, being Amsterdam and Dublin, your data, when you transfer it, when you move it within the cloud, it always stays within the edge of that data center region. It doesn't go out via the US, it doesn't go out via Asia or whatever. And this is what helps us get the on things like G Cloud, for example. So that's how we're set up, and as I say, that's where we are at the moment in Europe.
Great, thank you for that, Simon. Another question we've had is, obviously I've shown you kind of a combination of approaches. Someone's asking, what do you actually need to do some of the things that I've actually shown you? I guess how I wanted to show today is very much around an approach and a strategy. So I've actually shown a combination of solutions from Automated Intelligence, working with Microsoft technologies to enable some of the concepts I've discussed today. So first of all was data point. Data point allows us to do the kind of cleansing, categorization, understanding the information that you've got, and then ultimately adding a rules and logic-based approach to actually ensure that data is treated, migrated, or moved, or otherwise handled in the right way. So some data, depending on how it's categorized, may be moved to Azure, some may be moved to SharePoint in the most appropriate location, some may be left behind, some might be deleted. So effectively we would use those approaches to the technology based on your rules and logic to treat the data in the right way, and that's data point. The next one was obviously around how we actually manage that data within. So once it's moved, what do we do there? And cloud services from Automated Intelligence enables a lot of that capability. So that would be baked into SharePoint, either into Office 365 as an app or into SharePoint on premises as a SharePoint solution, which allows us to do several things. First of all, it allows us to have that connection into other storage platforms like Azure to have that reference point, enable that policy-driven archiving, so we can move data automatically based upon its age or its some other criteria into the most appropriate platform. We then have the ability to do things like metadata inheritance, so automatically apply metadata as content was migrated or uploaded, as I showed you there as well. Done through solutions like Compliance Extender through SharePoint. So what I'd encourage you to do is ultimately what we want to deliver is a solution which is going to which is going to fit your needs, and we will always propose the right group of technologies and Microsoft platforms to actually enable that to happen. So what I'd say is I'll put my contact details up now just so you can see that. So if you do have any questions, or you do have any if you do have any other kind of questions you'd like to ask, then please do contact us on those on the slide here through sales@automatedintelligence.com, and we can effectively build out a platform or build out a strategy that's going to work for you. Just another question we've had: are there any universities as a case study? And Simon, I was wondering if you knew off the top of your head whether you had any universities using Azure.
So yeah, there are case studies for universities. If you go into Bing or other search engines are available, and you type in Azure case studies, it'll take you to an Azure case study page, and you can filter via industry. So you choose education, you'll see them on there. Top of my head, university-wise, I can think of some US ones, UK ones. I can't think of. There are some on there. I can't think of any. I know that the UCAS, for example, use Azure, and it's a perfect case study. If you think about UCAS. They get a huge amount of demand when all the results come out and the university placings come out, and so they use everything on Azure at the moment. That's a case study you can look at, for example, and they use it so when all the results come out, they scale up, they use that huge power that's there for the cloud, but they use it for a very short time, and then once everyone's gone and seen where they're going to be placed, or if they've got the university place or not, they shut it all down and use that kind of scalability. It's a great cloud story, but go on to have a look on the Azure website. Basically, there's loads on there.
Lovely, thank you very much, Simon. So we just have one other question that's come through, and it's about the kind of the migration strategy itself. So if you're, for example, moving to the cloud, what considerations do you have to make? Do you have to put anything in the servers, or do you have to install anything server side? Some more technical question there. Effectively, we can be as flexible as you need to be. Obviously, it depends on the capability required or the approach. Naturally, you can't install anything into there isn't really a method to install server-side bits on Office 365, so we have an app-based approach that allows us to, and Microsoft's obviously driving that approach quite heavily, to add capability to things like Office 365 through our apps, and again, we'd be delighted to talk to you about that in more detail. If you were dealing with on-premises, we typically would install something like DataPoint in your data center, and that allows us to have a very quick connection to migrate that data through, so that would apply there. Again, from some of the solutions, such as the capabilities baked into SharePoint that we provide, that would again be installed as an app, or it would be installed as a SharePoint solution, depending on the kind of platform that you have. Ultimately, though, we provide a very flexible, very agile, and ultimately an approach which will lend itself to the platforms that you're utilizing. So again, we're very keen to discuss your individual needs and how we can apply that. But there are various ways in which we could achieve some of those things. Right, so it looks like there aren't any other questions, and we're just about up to time now as well. So unless anyone else has any other questions that they'd like to pose through the question and answer window, what I'd like to do now is thank you once more for your time. I'd like to thank Simon for your time today, for joining us on this webinar, providing some great insights into Azure and how that can work with from the Microsoft perspective. Like I say, I'd encourage you to go to automatedintelligence.com. Our details up there, Twitter, email, and so forth. If we haven't answered a question today that you'd like to know more detail on, or you'd like some more information from us, or have a one-to-one conversation, we'd be very pleased to have that conversation with you. So with that, I'd like